Hello. On this episode of Practically Pastoring Podcast, we're going to be talking about church drama. We're going to be talking about recycling sermons and whether axe throwing is a legitimate men's ministry event.
Hey, if people leave the church, can we at least keep their recipes?
My sermons are a lot like Thanksgiving leftovers. Way better the second time around.
And apparently, quoting myself from last Easter is now plagiarism.
Hey, if you call it a women's brunch, they'll come. If you call it a men's breakfast, you better have bacon.
I'm Frank. I'm here with Andrew, Tim, Jeff, and Delmar, and we're glad you're here. This is Practically Pastoring. Hey, don't do ministry alone. This is Practically Pastoring. Fellas, we have three questions from our Facebook group that I want us to be able to answer to help everyone else who are going through similar situations. This first question from an anonymous user in our group asked this: any helpful thoughts on suggestions on potential conversations with disgruntled what? What's funny?
You just read the words wrong. It was funny.
I did?
Yeah.
I'll try it again. Any helpful thoughts or suggestions on potential conversations with disgruntled previous church members who are now inviting current attenders to join them at their new church home? This is happening after the disgruntled former attenders brought up on their own, documented in the email they sent, that they didn't want to hurt the church and would not be inviting others to join them. Jeff and Andrew, do you guys have any experience with this? And do you have any advice for our friend here?
Yes, I have a little bit of experience with this, and I would say, first thing you got to remember is it's not your church. You don't own people, and they can do whatever they want. They're adults. Your job is to shepherd the flock that's among you, and if they've left the church, they're not among you anymore. So your job is not to shepherd them anymore. They've left your leadership. So having said that, this feels like betrayal, and it hurts, and it feels icky when someone is doing this kind of thing, because the reality is, as pastors, our relationships are all jumbled together. Our friendships, our leadership, it's all kind of one big weird pot. And so when someone leaves and then starts recruiting other people to leave, it can feel like, because sometimes it is, betrayal, and it's really difficult. And again, your job is to try to protect the flock that's among you. I think we can have different opinions about how that works. I don't think it's our responsibility necessarily to try to control people, but to just be very clear about what membership means and why the New Testament talks about the church as a family, and as there's this picture of a marriage between Christ and the church, and I think that applies to the local church, which is why it feels so hard when someone leaves under bad circumstances, because you are tearing a relationship apart. So it's really difficult, but I don't know that you really have any grounds to confront the person who's already left, who's recruiting new people. You do have grounds, however, to have conversations with the people who are still at your church, who are being maybe enticed to leave by someone, in terms of just reminding them what membership means, what it means to belong to a church family, and just holding up the reality of, if you leave under these circumstances, it is going to hurt people. I'm not saying this to manipulate you. My job is to tell you the truth. And the reality is, it will hurt this church if you leave, in particular for this kind of reason.
It's a lot like a breakup. The marriage analogy works, but also, unfortunately, the breakup analogy works. And I don't know the last time any of us have been through a real breakup, but I imagine pulling up an old email from that ex-girlfriend and saying, oh, hey, you said this would not go over very well, and pulling up an email that a church member sent months or years ago and saying you said you weren't going to do this is not going to win you any points with anybody. You're going to come across as incredibly petty. So beware of that. You don't get to choose how people who are not a part of your church anymore are going to relate to your church. So your best course of action is to not say unkind things about them. And as your mom taught you in kindergarten, if you don't have something nice to say, maybe don't say anything at all about them, and love the people that are still there. It is a stewardship issue. God has given you the people that are a part of your church to steward them and to steward the relationships. And if you spend all of your time and energy focusing on people that are no longer there, pretty soon you will not have anybody there to pastor. So focus on who you can focus on, and let God be the judge and the discerner of what's happening on the outside. And maybe reach out to the other pastor if you need to, but don't go after these former church members.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for you to just keep doing the right thing. Like Andrew said, don't give in to the temptation from our enemy to play his games. And then the second thing is, I can imagine in this conversation with the people who are being enticed to leave, maybe not necessarily an ultimatum, but them having like, well, what about this? And this person said this, and I think it's fair for you to say, look, if you're asking me to share with you or to like break down the opinion of another person who's already left our church, I really can't do that. You need to go ask them for their opinion. If you have a question for me about how our church operates or our leadership, or if you have a legitimate question, man, I would love to have that conversation with you. And I think you can set a clear boundary that what I'm not going to do is speak for another person or try to answer a question that isn't coming from you. I'm not going to allow you to be the go-between between me and this other disgruntled person. And then I would say if it gets to this place where the person who's being enticed to leave by the former disgruntled person starts making like what seem like ultimatums, I've had to say to people before, we don't give each other ultimatums in a family. So if you want to leave, you're free to do that. But I'm not going to be beholden to a threat of if I don't do this, you're going to leave. That's up to you. You know who I am. You know what my character is. You know my leadership style. And if you want to, join in on what we're doing here, I would love to have you. But if you don't, then I'm not going to come chase you down for this.
And there's no such thing as a perfect church. So the people that left, you can say that they're disgruntled, and maybe they are, but they left for a reason. And to say, oh, these people are just disgruntled and they left, no, there's something about the church that caused them to leave. Maybe some other church was a better fit. Maybe there was a leadership issue. Maybe there was just some kind of an ecclesiology issue. But they left for a reason, and I'm guessing that the people that they are enticing are people that they share some affinity with. Maybe they were in a small group, maybe they raised their kids together. I don't know what it was, but there is a pre-existing relationship that is, they're not just going to the church Facebook page and looking for every like and comment and saying, ooh, hey, you should join us here at Second Baptist since we've left First Baptist. That's probably not what's going on. So you can't get mad at people in your church for having a relationship with someone who used to be in your church. We want the people in our churches to have relationships, but we also have to recognize that most churches are cyclical. There's about a 7-year cycle that most churches recycle about 50% of their membership. And that's not great. That's not
Especially
something that we
smaller
love.
churches.
Yeah. And as the two pastors of the smaller churches here on this podcast, we feel it and we recognize it. When there's two families gone on a Sunday morning, it's like, oh, that row is empty and now 10% of our congregation is gone. So we certainly get it, but you also need to realize that sometimes God is using your church for a season in that family's life. Not everybody that comes to your church is going to be in your church for the next 60 years, and that's okay. Again, it is a stewardship issue. Steward the people that God has entrusted to you for the season that he has entrusted them to you.
I think to be able to have that relationship with the other church's pastor, to be able to like bring up the fact of what's happening and what's going on, that involves relationship. And sometimes the biggest issue why you can't have that conversation is because pastors are in competition with one another and they don't feel like they can be friends with one another. And that's where Practically Pastoring Conference 2026 is trying to make a difference. Hey, Andrew and Tim, can you tell everybody before we move on to the next segment about the Practically Pastoring Conference that's happening February 9th to the 11th next year?
It's basically if you took all of the good things about pastors' conferences and filtered out all of the fluff, and that's what you're left with. It is the relationships, it is the conversations around a table. It is a great small gathering of pastors who love the church and don't want to do ministry alone.
Here's the deal. It's Florida and February. Like those two things should go together. You're going to get real conversations. You're going to get practical tools. You're going to get lots of free and fun stuff. And I'll also say this: if you are local, meaning you are here in the Tampa Bay area, we have a special code just for you. We want you
just
there.
reach out.
Reach
got
out to
you.
us. We'll let you know. And if you're not local, we still got you. Early bird registration is going to end on November 16th. So if you want the absolute lowest price right now, you're going to want to use this code Jeff Hates AI, and your ticket's only going to be $20. $20.
Yeah.
3 days of a conference for $20. That's like $6.33.3 a day.
Andrew,
for a
how are we
conference.
actually paying for this?
I have no idea.
Look, go to practicallypastoring.com right now. Practicallypastoringconference.com. Grab your spot.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the next segment. This is something we've talked about before, but it comes up. People ask the question. Delmar and Tim, I would love to hear from you guys on this. I have a question for those. This is from the anonymous user again in our Facebook group. I have a question for those of you who are more experienced pastors. How often do you return to your previous messages or to sermons or on passages that you've preached before? And when you do that, what is your preparation process? There's a range of ways to approach this, all the way from simply pulling out your old notes or outlines and repreaching them, to starting from scratch, to taking the old notes and refreshing them as you look back on the passage again. I'm just curious how you all navigate this. Del, Tim, what do you got?
Yeah, I think I don't know about you, Tim, but you ever go revisit some of your old notes and you're like, what was I thinking?
Yep.
I think you got to be careful just pulling your old stuff. But also, I heard a pastor say one time that writing a sermon is a pastor's way of giving birth to a child, in the sense that like a lot of work goes into it. And I don't know about you, I don't want to just give it one little go at the pulpit. This is what I used to be at a church where you'd preach 4 times in one weekend, and by the 4th time you preach that sermon, you're like, yes. But if you're in a smaller church, you do 1, maybe 2 services. I don't think there's a problem with that. But I also think, to the point of the person writing here, it needs to churn up in your soul again. Just pulling it out of file, I get that if you're put on the spot and you're like, I got to come up with something really fast. But I think one of the things you have to do in the preparation process is still have the preparation process. If I'm going to use a series that maybe I did 10 years ago, I'm still going to have a study session with all my material. I got to make sure this content is still working in my heart. If I'm in a different place, if I have a different understanding of the text, if it's not still convicting to me, I cannot speak something authentically if I'm not being convicted about it.
I think every pastor comes to a point where you realize I've only got 66 books, right? That's not changing. And if you've been pastoring and or preaching for a long time, eventually a passage is going to resurface that you have already preached. You're going to circle back. And you dipping into your notes that you've already studied, I would say that's stewardship, not laziness. You've already put in the work. It would be silly to not revisit those notes. The Spirit's revelation, there's not like an expiration date there. Like that's still there. Now, your season of life might have changed. How you view the passage now might look a little different. I would say for me, I know we're preaching Exodus right now, and I have preached several of these passages previously, and I have used my notes in tandem with writing the new sermon for this series, and it's been very helpful. I haven't preached it verbatim yet because it hasn't really fit the series, but I've absolutely used my notes. They kind of become, and maybe you should see it like this too. It's like your own personal commentary. You're now just wrestling with the text from a past version of you who's already studied it. I'll take the old outline, or mine's typically a manuscript. I'll read through it, and then I'm going to ask, what would I preach now if this text again was, the first time? If I'm preaching this for the first time, would I use any of this again? Sometimes 90% of it's like, this is solid. Like I am absolutely using this. Maybe it's a little less. And there's been times where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start over. Like I like what's here, but I need to start completely new. And there's this tension. I get it. There's a tension between stewardship and laziness. Stewardship says, don't reinvent the wheel if the Spirit's already given you something faithful. And then laziness says, don't bother seeking anything new. It's already there. Why would you waste your time revisiting this again? I would say the goal is to honor both here. You want to honor both the word and your people. You're not going to want to give leftovers, but you don't want to just throw out good bread, right? Like if it's still there and it's usable, by all means, absolutely use it.
But now all I'm hearing is that viral video of those people singing "Good Bread," really, really good bread, and so
I laughed a lot.
I laughed a lot at that as well.
I would say for Bivo guys, Bivo pastors, it is okay to reuse a faithful message. Like, don't get bent out of shape about that. Preaching is not performance, it's proclamation. If it was true and spirit led before, it can still feed the flock again. I had a mentor used to say, you can microwave the message, but not the anointing. Look, both can be true. Be faithful, be a good steward. Don't be lazy, but don't throw out what God's already given you.
Also, if you're preparing for Advent and you're trying to say something brand new that's never been said before, since this is November, that's a problem. You might need to come up with a new illustration and some different application, but if the exegesis is different than anyone has ever preached, you're probably a heretic.
So we didn't go here on this particular question, but we probably should, because every year we have Christmas, every year we have Easter, we have the same holidays every year, and I'm at the point now where this will be my 7th Christmas Eve preaching. So I'm like, okay, like when can I start recycling? So I have now started to go through and I've combined previous sermons. I try to stay away from the same illustrations, but I know some of these, I mean, there's a good chunk of people that I'm only going to see once or twice a year. I don't want to preach the same sermon every Christmas Eve, but at the same time, there's a nostalgic factor to preaching.
There are only so many texts that you're going to preach Christmas Eve.
Right. Like we rewatch the same Christmas specials every year, do we not? Like it's okay to hear the same verses being read. I don't know, Del, do you have a different take when it comes to holidays in particular?
No, I think that you could fold that in with a lot of things, because there are certain things you're going to talk about more than once. Marriage, you're going to talk about that more than once. Tithing, being generous. And what happens is, I think pastors are like, oh, I can't use my old stuff. I'm not being unfaithful. So they try to come up with novel new stuff, which is just like what Andrew said, it's regurgitated heresy, or even worse, or not worse, but in the same vein, it's culturally insensitive, and it just does not connect. I remember here in South Carolina a few years ago, a pastor was trying to be edgy on Christmas Eve and use the N-word in his sermon. Okay, a mega church pastor that all of you would know if I said his name.
Noel?
And then, yes, that would have been better. And then the same pastor, he decided to rewrite the 10 commandments of thou shalt not to, these are actually 10 things. It was the thou shalls that he inverted the 10 commandments to try to make it like you have 10 freedoms, and it went off into squirrely land as well. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you've done good work, it's okay to lean into your good work. You know what? When a carpenter builds the door to my house, I don't walk through the door one time. I think that it's okay to lean into your old work and to like really learn what's working.
What's the background music to that?
It was getting inspirational.
Yes.
Was that Lee Greenwood's "Proud to Be an American," Dale?
That was the Cheers theme song.
Oh, okay.
I think to put a bow on this is I think like we get kind of creatively tired with the same sermons every Christmas and every Easter. I think we are like, oh my gosh, I want something fresh.
My imposter syndrome just blossoms whenever I do it.
Yeah. But like what's not fresh for you is still brand new revelation to like the people you're speaking to.
And like we were just saying, if 50% of your congregation is new every 7 years, a 10-year-old series is new to 70% of the people sitting in the pews.
So I only need 7 years of sermon series, and I just hit the refresh button.
I mean, that's not quite what I'm saying. Change the graphic, change the application.
One thing I will caution you with, that this will catch you, is it's interesting. I could preach Psalm 23 2 times in a few years, and people will be like there to receive it. But you need to keep a list of which illustrations you use. You
Mhm.
don't want to talk about the car wreck you got in this year and then the car wreck you got in next year with the same angle, because that those illustrations are very unique to the speaker, and you don't want people to think that you actually aren't trying, even though you really are. You just forgot that you told them that. And one thing you can say is if you're using an illustration that maybe they know about, you can preface it with, hey, some of you guys know this. I shared this a while back, but for the rest of everybody, I want to catch you up to speed. That's a good thing to maybe use if you're looking at revisiting an old sermon.
I think the way you update your illustrations and your examples is by being the pastor that God called you to be, like being with people. God will give you a new illustration for an old sermon if you're in and amongst your people and you're doing life with them and praying with them and ministering to them. God will give you new stuff in that regards. But the exegesis is probably going to be pretty similar if you exegete the sermon well in the last time. So you reuse your sermons with discernment, and you're not plagiarizing yourself.
Just not be.
Hey,
Just don't do it out of laziness. I think is the big
yes, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, but also if you're like expositionally preaching and you're like, you did Exodus and then you're doing Exodus 2 years later, that's probably not good.
2 years, not good. 6 years, I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
I was thinking when Tim and Dell were first talking, like, if I am going to preach verse by verse through Nehemiah, that probably needs to be original. If I'm preaching verse by verse through Acts, chances are I've done that in the
In some way, shape, or form, you've done it.
once a decade. There are certain books or certain passages that are gonna get hit on.
yeah.
And so there are some passages where absolutely let's start with a clean slate because this is a once in a career thing that I'm going to preach this through.
Mm.
But then there are other things that I'm probably going to hit 3 or 4 times at least in my tenure at my church.
This is
So
a funny
those are-
conversation too, because it's very evangelical of us to be talking about this. Like if you're from
Yeah, if you're
more
in a
mainline
liturgical tradition.
Yeah,
and
right.
you preach out of the lectionary, like you're preaching the same sermons a lot.
So here's the question: what are we doing? Because some of those guys
Every
get
third
paid a
year,
lot
baby.
more than we do.
They really do. They got great pensions too.
They got
Wow.
fantastic pensions. All they got to do is read at like a 5th grade level. I can almost
Yeah.
do that if I keep trying.
And I mean, this was brought up.
15-minute homily that you just did. We just lost like a third of our audience. They're so offended now.
This was brought up in the comments of this question too. That like if you're following a liturgical calendar, this is kind of answered for you. But beyond that, if you are expositionally preaching, the odds of you doing a rehash sermon is going to be stretched out way longer. I think this, except for holidays, I think this question gets brought up most probably for people who preach more topically and like are and this is why like whenever we talk about preaching and like topical sermons versus expositional sermons, I'm always like, man, it's way harder to do topical sermons.
I just preached on adultery twice in 3 weeks, and like sexuality because we're in Proverbs, and it's like you can't just be like, "Ooh, well, I guess we're not touching that subject again." Well, just kidding. Chapter 6 brings it up again.
Yeah,
So, like
the two easiest seasons that I've experienced in the almost decade of being a senior pastor of sermon prep have been the 2 longest sermon series that I've done. So right now
100%.
we're 15, 16 weeks into the book of John, and my sermon prep is taking, let's say, 6 or 7 hours a week. Whereas I'm usually like a 4 to 6 week series max, but a few times a year we'll do a longer one. And right now, I'm like, man, I need to tap into this long series thing all the time because the theming is there already. And here's where we were last week to catch people up. It is saving me so much time because the rhythm is the same going into just, hey, we stopped at this verse, so we're picking up at the next verse. So there is something to be said about not trying to recreate the wheel week after week after week.
I think the prep stacks when you're in a long sermon like that.
Yeah.
That may actually be a good topic for a whole pod because there are some massive advantages to doing some long-term sermon stuff. That might be a whole good content.
And the pastors that I know, like in my life, who I've looked up to since I was like in high school, the ones that have been in the same churches for 30 plus years, they're verse by verse guys.
Yep.
The guys who are jumping around every 5 to 7 years, those are the guys that they have their greatest hits album and they just want to
Wow.
play it again and again and move on to a new crowd. But the ones that are going verse by verse are the ones that seem to stay rooted and stay in place long term.
And think about like with all the things we have to do as a pastor, with all the planning, all the meetings, if there's one thing I don't have to think about is what I'm preaching next week. Like
Yeah.
Right.
like that's been planned for me.
Yep.
Like me and Tim just did all of 2026 preaching for the most part. I think we
We
got
did.
all the way to the fall, right?
Yeah.
And we just looked at the book of Exodus and broke it down. And man, that was, I mean,
You're
we
so
got
helpful.
it done pretty quickly because
We did 2 hours.
the hardest part was where do we break up the text?
Right.
Like where do we break up the books? Like in the book, like, and
Which
then like
any good commentaries are going to help you with that.
already do it
Exactly.
for you.
Yeah.
That's what we did. Yep.
Exactly. So,
Or in your case, Chat GPT, right? I mean,
That too. It did help.
I just
Yeah.
think like when you do topical sermons, you can preach topically well, but man, that's an exhausting venture of thinking through, okay, I have a 4 week here, 6 weeks here. Oh no, there's a holiday here that's gonna break it up. Oh, we have a fall kickoff here. So do we really want to start this series that's heavier right after that? Like we're in the book of the Bible and we're gonna finish that book of the Bible. And then after that, we'll start another book of the Bible. Like, it's amazing.
I will say, I almost feel like it's going to take, if you're moving from topical to expository and you're making that shift, it's going to take a minute to get
it's
used to
gonna
it
be culture shock.
because you're going to feel like I'm cheating. Like
It is feel like you're
it's
cheating.
like, wait, is it allowed to be this easy? I don't have to come up with a new graphic every 3 to 4 weeks with a whole new scheme and like, I mean, when we were in youth ministry,
Yeah.
that was like major part of our planning was the graphics and the communication and how we're going to get this out in time to let everyone know we're starting a brand new series in 4 weeks. And so every time I see a church posting every 4 to 6 weeks of the brand new series, I'm like, oh, I feel for you.
You know what?
I just feel for it.
What's funny is like we were using, Tim and I at Lakeview were using a free trial of this I'm not gonna say its name, but it's one of those resources.
Is it a pass for ministers?
It's a big resource website that gives you sermon series.
It's not a
and
free
stuff like
trial
that.
anymore. Forgot to get
And
canceled.
and one thing I was thinking of is those websites don't necessarily serve churches that are in long series.
No.
That's
Because-
not true. Because if it's the one that I'm thinking it was, my Acts series that I did, my graphics came from them, and then they had.
Oh, we still use their
I would
graphics.
say
No.
They had like a 50-week break. Like, do you want to do this
Yes.
in 30 weeks or 50 weeks? And
Interesting.
it's
But
more-
what is the value exchange when
Oh,
you don't need
no.
them next month? Does that make sense?
No,
Right.
No, you download 2 or 3 years at a time, and then you
Yeah.
cancel.
And
Right.
so, so my point is, it's like those type of, I mean, even to an extent, like download youth ministry. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
youth ministry is a completely different conversation. But when you're in topical series, those websites are a big help because you can build your preaching calendar if you are topical, because it gives you all the graphics, all the ideas, all the flow. But when you do expositional preaching,
Yeah.
I need one graphic once for 40 weeks.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with being topical, especially
Yeah.
in like a life stage ministry. You have
Yeah.
you have high schoolers for 4
Yeah.
years, so
youth
there
ministry is a completely different
there are
conversation.
certain topics that you want to hit on for each kid.
Yes.
But when you hope and assume that you have someone for at least 7 years,
Yep.
but hopefully longer than that, you're gonna want to hit on more than just the 3 or 4 greatest hits topics.
Yeah. Well, let's end up with this one last question from our Facebook group. It's about men's and women's events. They asked us, "What are your thoughts doing? What are your thoughts? What are your churches doing for men's and women's groups and events? We currently have quarterly events. Does your church do different things each event, or keep it consistent?" I want to hear from everybody here. Jeff, get us started. Do you guys do men's and women's events? And if so, what does that look like?
we do not. We don't do any
Oh.
kind of men's or women's.
Great
anything.
answer, Jeff.
We do small groups and we do Sunday service, and then if people get together on their own, they do. But we don't do any kind of sanctioned like men's breakfast, women's thing. We don't do any of that. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying we do or don't believe in it. It's just not a priority for us.
Yeah. So, do you guys have church-wide events? And that if you do a church-wide event, it just happens to be for everybody, not just for men or women? Is that how that works?
So like the only things we do right now are a potluck every 5th Sunday, or we call it family feast because we don't believe in luck. So we do that every time there's a 5th week, and then there's occasional like outreach events where we do like a family movie night outside, or we might do. We actually have talked about doing like big breakfast on a Saturday morning, with just pancakes, but we have never done it like just as a men's thing or a women's thing. And then we do Thursday night small groups, which always have a meal, and that's mixed as well. And so it's a little bit of philosophy of ministry. It's a little bit like I also don't really. I'm trying to push against doing too many affinity groups, where it's like youth group and then young adults and then young and single and then young and married and then I want it to be mixed because I think that's how the church is supposed to work. There's multi-generational worship going on, and if you came into our church on a Sunday morning, it is very, very diverse generationally and actually pretty diverse ethnically too. And that's great because that's what our community looks like, and I'm really happy and proud about that. So no, we don't do any kind of extra men's or just women's things. If somebody brought it up and wanted to do it, I don't know that I would like shut it down or veto it, but they would have to have a pretty good reason as to why that's going to be more effective than the other things that we're already doing.
Tim, share what we're doing at Lakeview.
Sure. I will say this. A few years ago, we did not. We didn't have any of this. We didn't have the bandwidth. We were really trying to prioritize a few things at a time. And it wasn't until we had the volunteer base who said, "Hey, we're interested in starting a men's and women's ministry. We'd like to start small and then kind of see it grow from there." We gave them the green light. This was not staff led at all. This is all volunteer led. So we have a volunteer leader over women's ministry. We have a volunteer leader over our men's ministry. It's nothing too crazy. For our men, we have a monthly men's prayer breakfast. We did start doing that pretty early on when we were like, okay, we'll do something for the men. And the men's prayer breakfast on the first Saturday of every month, it's probably one of the most well attended regular events that we have outside of Sunday morning. Our men love it. We come together, we pray, and we eat, and we leave. We limit it to 1 hour. It's 7:30 to 8:30. And we're out. So there's still plenty of time to have your Saturday and do the things that you got to get done with your fam. For our ladies, they also have a monthly prayer gathering on a Saturday morning. I think they just started incorporating some food and coffee in there with that. We also have men's and women's Bible studies that will meet periodically throughout the year. Those have also been birthed out of our men's and women's ministries. And then from time to time, we will have a men's retreat and a women's retreat. That doesn't happen every year. It might be like an every other year type of thing, depending on if our volunteer leaders have the bandwidth to pull it off. Because you guys know, like those types of events require a lot. And we're not asking our staff to do anything additional right now when it comes to stuff like that. So if our volunteers want to go down that road, we do the best we can to resource them and give them a budget and everything. But I'm with you, Jeff. We try not to say yes to anything that doesn't make sense to where we are right now as a church. So the yeses that we have said have been very strategic. So we have said yes to men's and women's ministries right now.
We
I
have
think
a weekly women's event where the women with young children come, and we provide childcare for them, and they're able to just be together and be in community. I guess that would definitely constitute as a women's specific thing. It's more of an outreach in our community. We have women come who don't necessarily go to our church, so that's something we do. As far as women's ministry, we'll have just like some small groups that meet on Sunday morning every now and then. There's a ladies class, there's a guys class, and then we'll have there's like once a year a retreat. One thing I'll say is like, I don't know how it is in y'all's context. It's easier for us to get the women together than the guys. I know a lot of our men work, even the older men work. So ironically, maybe not. Sometimes our men's day seems to be the church work day where we get together and we're cutting limbs and ripping up stuff out the ground. Men like that. Also, our security team, they like to get together and go practice their firearms and shoot guns. So sometimes they have no problem getting them to do that. But I've learned with men, if they have a purpose beyond socializing, such as serving or helping somebody, we generally have a higher turnout. Whereas women, they can get together. They don't necessarily have to have a cause. And one of the things I'll say is they'll make their own cause, which is awesome. Like men, we're going to show up, we're going to feed, we're going to work. Women will show up, and then next thing you know, they've made blankets for all the newborns at the local hospital. It's like, great. But I would say this is one of those things where I treat it like student ministry or young adult ministry. Is it good to have people in the same space who are kind of similar where they could be? Yes, but our ultimate win is that we're in this sanctuary worshiping together as families on Sunday. Isolation is not the win of our church into different silos. It is coming together and being a family.
We seem to have a lot of positive outcomes from getting people serving together. So we have a men's group that meets every Saturday morning. We have a couple of different ladies groups that meet in the church, and that's not like that's not an event. They're there 50 weeks a year doing their small groups together. But then when we bring them together for, we have a pancakes in the park event coming up where we're doing breakfast for a city event. And typically the men's group has shown up and cooked for that, because getting men together for something outside of what they normally do, like Dell kind of suggested, hey, there is a work component that's going to get the men involved. We want everyone to come and cut down this tree. We want everyone to come and do a job for the city. We're going to get men turning out for that, as opposed to, hey, men, we're going to have you come and listen to a speaker. Nobody would show up. And so getting the men serving, and then having the ladies come and kind of being ambassadors for our church while we're at an event like that seems to be very successful. Historically, we would get those groups together and do things like at a Ronald McDonald House or whatever, and that has also worked really well, where we get our groups out of their regularly scheduled programming to serve together. I think finding new and unique ways to get groups that are used to doing one thing serving is a great way to kind of build camaraderie within the group.
We've also been trying to figure out how we can scale this as Lakeview continues to grow. So one thing that Jeff said is what we do as well. We do rely heavily on our home group system and our small group system. So as a new home group leader, Frank, one thing that Steph and I are trying to do in our home group is do men's and women's separate things from time to time, just to get the dudes together and ladies together. So we have a dudes only thing coming up in December. We have a ladies only thing coming up in December. So I think this can actually scale into your home group system as well, because there might come a time where it's going to be really difficult to get all of the guys in the church together, all the girls. But in the home group system, it might work even better, maybe even more intimate and special connections that way too.
I think I like what Jeff was saying about not trying to create unnecessary events or affinity groups when it's not necessary. When it's organic, it's kind of cool. But hopefully, as you heard, there's some some cool tips and tricks of how to exactly get more men involved when they seem to be the hardest to corral. I think if anything, I'm seeing this at Lakeview, is it's not an issue of getting women together. It's holding them back to not go to a place where there's a lot of wasted sideways energy, whether it's like hosting a women's conference, an event. And I even think about what Delmar said about, you know, women get together and then at the end of it they have blankets for the hospital. My first thought was, does the hospital need blankets? Like if we're gonna do a service project together,
Yeah.
let's make sure that service project is actually maybe they do need blankets, but maybe they need bottles. Like, what can we do to make sure that we're actually not? I'm a big proponent of not wasting people's time and not creating sideways energy for the church and the ministry.
But Frank, if your men's event doesn't have bacon, you're probably in trouble.
Yeah, and one thing about the men's breakfast is they have bacon.
Yes. I will tell you this though. If a lot of times what I've learned, especially with like women's groups, if they're coming together and do a thing, a lot of times it's because a need was brought to them. I actually watched a women's ministry at a church get utterly destroyed because it was a campus of the main church and the women's ministry was doing some service, and because it wasn't sanctioned by the main church, they actually pulled the person in and said, you have to fundamentally change your women's group. And they were very, I mean, that was in their context, and the women's group pretty much died. So I'm with you. We don't need sideways energy, but man, we need to use tact, because when these groups form, these men's and women's ministry, they form their own culture within your culture. And that's where I would just be a little cautious if they're starting to get too grounded with each other and not in the life of the church, because then they collectively they can wield just as much, if not more, influence than the pastor, and they become hard to lead.
I've seen so many churches who actually get splintered because the men's ministry or the women, mostly I usually it's no, like, not trying to be sexist, it's usually the women's ministry
Or small group.
or small group syndrome.
Like, I've never seen a
where
split that wasn't some kind of little group within the church.
Yep.
Man, where they start like galvanizing over like the church should be doing this,
Yep.
or we like, and if we're not doing this, and people are trying to designate funds just for that ministry or that group, and
Mhm.
and it
Big
gets
red flag.
really messy. And I mean, this is the type of stuff that like I'm praying about when I start this church plant. Well, is to like, how can I get everyone behind the vision of the church, not of these like micro niches. So anyways, Delmar, give me one more.
Kind of my final thought on this is be careful when you make silos. I'm from the country. If you let your grain sit in the silos too long, what happens to the grain? It rots.
You get whiskey.
And
Oh,
yeah,
right.
well, you get whiskey, exactly. You get drunk. But that's kind of the thing. We need to make sure that if there are silos in your church, that you're keeping them moving, that you're keeping them spun
Wow.
into the life of the church, or they can become a septic thing within the church.
Oh, I like that. I like that little country illustration. I'm gonna
nice.
use that one day.
Yeah.
Nice.
Go for it.
I was waiting for like some kind of shooting or gun illustration to happen.
Or
but-
howdy y'all or
Wanting
something.
to sing the song "Rain Makes Corn, Corn Makes Whiskey."
All right, finish that song.
Hey, on that note, we are glad that you joined us again. Join us on our Facebook group. Go on Facebook, search for Practically Pastoring. Your question can be featured on the next episode. And we want you to come to the Practically Pastoring Conference next year in February in Florida. PracticallyPastoringConference.com. Promo code Jeff Hates AI, and the tickets will be only $20. But that changes, that expires in like a couple weeks, like November 15th. That's when it expires. So if you want to come at the cheapest price ever, sign up right now. With that being said, we hope to see you next week. This is Practically Pastoring. Bye.
Also, if you DM me, I'll tell you the name of the men's ministry event that Frank said I wasn't allowed to mention on this show.
It's really good.
Bye.